Don lives just 45 minutes north of me here in Salem, Oregon, or he did at the time. He died in 2017. So I went up and met him. We had one thing in common. We were both graduates of the University of Oregon here in Eugene, and we both love sports. And so I told him, I said, if you want somebody to write a book that starts out, I was born in Astoria, Oregon in 1921, and then I grew up, blah, 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 blah. I said, I'm probably not the one to write your book, but if you want to write a book that helps readers really understand the soul scarring parts of war, and really understand from a soldier's point of view what it's like, then maybe I am. And he chose me. And so in 2008, Easy Company Soldier came out, published by St. Martin's Press. And that's, I spent probably, I interviewed Don probably a couple of dozen times. Yes.
Here's this book right here, Easy Company Soldier. I have that as well.
Yeah. So I did that book in 2008. I got to know Don pretty well. And I believe at that time he would have been in his mid 80s. And then life went on. I saw Don, I think in 2014, I kind of said my goodbyes to him. I knew that he was in poor health. And then 3 years later, he died in 2017. His daughter, Marianne McNally, contacted me in, January of 2018 or 19. And we met, and she said, I think there's a second book. My father met this German soldier late in his life, and they became great friends. And now I'm great friends with Fritz Engelbert's two sons. And it sounded to me like a great sort of feature story for a newspaper. It didn't sound like it was book worthy, but the more I got into it, and I talked to Volker and Matthias, the sons of Fritz Engelbert, I learned that they would be willing to come to the United States to be interviewed. I learned that they had letters from their father from World War II. And I learned that Don and their father Fritz had fought within 5 miles of each other in the Battle of the Bulge. And so I suddenly got really interested in this. And then I had underestimated how deep the friendship was, that they not only met in Bastogne in Germany in 2004 on the 60-year anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, but then met 2 other times and really became close friends. And really, in a sense, like you said at the start, Dave, they helped each other heal from the 6 decades of PTSD. Both were feeling a lot of angst. Fritz feeling the shame of having served Hitler, Don feeling the guilt of having killed so many German soldiers. And so over beers in Bastogne, on literally the 60-year anniversary of the start of the Battle of the Bulge, they kind of forgave each other and began this amazing friendship. And now they're, Fritz's 2 sons and Don's daughter are closest of friends. They, until COVID hit, they had, a couple of times a year, one of them would go to Europe or the other would come over here. And so it's quite an amazing story. It's the rare war story with a happy ending.
When Sergeant Malarkey decided to write his memoirs, Easy Company Soldier, was it hard for him to kind of, because obviously, you kind of have to go back into the past. Was that something that was it really hard for him to write that book?
I think it's a great question, Dave, and I think the answer is yes. It was very difficult for him. And yet I also would say that I think it was therapeutic at the same time. Sometimes hard things are also good things. And I think in this case, again, this was before, I guess about 6 years after Band of Brothers came out as an HBO series. So in some ways, the guys from Easy Company had gotten a lot of attention and people were patting them on the back. And like Don told me, said, the thing that meant most to me with Band of Brothers was that I realized that I'd done something good. And for 60 years or 50 years, I suppose at that point, I'd always sort of thought I'd done something evil, something bad. I'd killed German soldiers. And Band of Brothers reminded me that there was purpose in what we did, and that, Hitler's tyranny was threatening to take over the world, and we stopped that. So, but that doesn't make all of the demons go away. And it's not, and people patting you on the back and getting to go out to dinner with Tom Hanks, those things are really nice, but they don't they don't quell the storm that's raging deep in your soul. And experts will tell you that what really does that is facing those demons and talking about them and dealing with them and putting them in perspective. And I think that Fritz started to do Don started to do that in 2008. But I think that when he met, I think meeting Fritz is what really accelerated that.
Mm-hmm. When they were, filming Band of Brothers, they would have interviews, of the actual veterans, right prior to each episode.
Sure.
And I remember I would always, you'd see some of the, the guys when they were talking about, if they were wounded, when they were wounded,
Right.
And you'd see kind of these, emotions start to, come back to the surface. And, and of course, Sergeant Malarkey, it seemed that, he would get emotional quite a bit.
I remember Don's interview before Band of Brothers, and he was among the more emotional, visibly emotional, because his daughter would always remind me he always had a soft heart, and so sometimes soft-hearted people get thrown into war, and it doesn't mean when they come out of it that they're hard-hearted. It means that they suppress a lot of stuff, and they try to pretend that they're hard-hearted, but deep inside they're still soft-hearted. And Don was among those, and he had great respect for the German soldiers. He saw them as individuals. He didn't see them as simply the enemy. And so his opportunity to meet Fritz 60 years after the Battle of the Bulge was just serendipitous in a way, in that it gave him an opportunity to sit across from a guy, look him in the eyes, and basically say to him, Fritz, you had no choice. Mm-hmm. Hitler made you do what you did. You were part of Hitler Youth. And Fritz, with his son interpreting, Matthias was there interpreting into English for Don. He turned it around and said, Don by this point had broken into tears. He said, I would say the same thing to you, that to forgive yourself, that you had no choice. Your country put a gun in your hands and said, go fight. And so both of them realized that they had a lot more in common than they ever would have imagined. And they learned from each other. They met 2 or 3 years later in Bastogne and brought their families this time. And the families sort of hit it off. Marianne would say, it was almost like we'd always been families, even though there was this cultural divide, there was a language divide, there was an age divide. And these two countries had been bitter rivals in World War II. We just felt like all of that melted away, and we had a new family.
You mentioned how basically, Fritz, he had to go do this, obviously, as a Hitler Youth, and you hear about, I've seen in past interviews where guards of the concentration camps, they would be interviewed, and it was pretty much to the effect of, well, if you don't do this, we're going to kill you and your family.
Right.
And how, so many people, feel the guilt because, like war, it's safe to say, more than half to all of them, they don't want to be there.
Right.
I was watching one of your other interviews where, Fritz, I guess he felt he'd been used. And
I think he felt duped, and from the time he was age 10, he was in Hitler Youth, but he totally bought in. He was all in for Hitler, and interestingly enough, his father was not. His father didn't believe that Hitler was who he sort of said that he was, and it was very discombobulating, a very difficult relationship growing up. But this guy, he was spoon-fed hate and fear from the age 10 at a time when Don Malarkey, growing up in Astoria, Oregon, was like living the life of Huckleberry Finn and fishing on the Nehalem River and diving for crawdads and camping out overnight. He had all this freedom in the world to be who he wanted to be, and Fritz had no freedom whatsoever. Hitler basically said, this is who you will be. You will go off, and if need be, you will die for me. And so then after the war, he had all of this angst because he had been complicit in this. He said, then the blood of the Jews is on my hands. Even though he never killed another soldier in any of his World War II experience. And so he had a lot to unpack that way. And Don had a lot to unpack. He talks about coming here to the University of Oregon after the war, and one night he couldn't sleep, so he brought a photo of E Company down into the basement of the fraternity, and he took a felt pen and he wrote KIA for killed in action, or SIA or SWA, seriously wounded in action, on the chest of all the soldiers. And there were only about 10 or 20% of those soldiers who didn't have something written across their chest. Wow. And he felt a lot of survivor's guilt. He felt guilt for killing so many German soldiers, including one who was 16, and because he checked the guy's records because he couldn't believe how young he was after he killed him. So yeah, both guys dealing with very difficult thing. Don's answer was alcohol. He drank heavily. One night he attempted suicide, or was going to, and then stopped. But he told me once, he said, every night I'd go out for a drink, and at the bottom of my scotch, I could see the face of every man I left in Bastogne. Wow. And so, and meanwhile, Fritz in Germany, his family would get together on a Sunday afternoon, and it would conversations would start involving the war, and many people decades after the war were still defending Hitler, still standing up for him, still finding pride in Germany. And Fritz was saying, why are you defending this man? He's indefensible. And he would get angry. And his son said, most of the parties wound up with my mom and dad having to leave because my dad and his uncle, his brothers and cousins just could not get along because there was so much friction about the war.
Yeah, it's harkens back to the saying, young men die for old men's wars. Or it's like, old men declare war, and then, the young ones go out and die. And
but what we forget is that those wars don't go away. Those young men become old men, and they're not reliving the glories of their youth. They're reliving the pain of their youth. One of the most searing scenes in my mind was, I think it's 2015, and I believe Fritz has just found out that he has serious cancer. He's going to die soon. And on the way home from the hospital, he turns to his son who's driving, Matthias, and says, in the field in France, if I hadn't zigzagged, like a jackrabbit, I would have died like my good friend Fritz Doring. And Matthias told me, he said, can you imagine this, Bob? This is almost 70 years, more than 70 years since the war. He's just been told he's going to die. And what is he thinking about? He's thinking about a time when he was 21 years old, running across a field in a battle with the Americans, and his friend Fritz dies and he lives. That's what's on his mind. But it doesn't go away.
Yeah, one you mentioned, where they were talking about how they were growing up, around the same age, and it kind of reminds me of the scene. I believe it was they were talking to Shifty Powers, and talking about the enemy, and he's like, I never knew this guy, or if not for the war, I would have never known this guy, but he might like to hunt.
Sure, I like to fish.
I like to, yeah, exactly. I like to fish. And,
yeah. I love that. That's one of the best interviews right there.
Yeah.
Mary Ann Malarkey, or McNally, Don's daughter, that's her favorite line, and I think that's what Saving My Enemy, the book, teaches people, is that at our core, it's not the uniform that we're wearing; it's that we're both human beings, and when we get beyond the uniforms, we find these things that we have in common.
Now, what did Sergeant Malarkey and his family think of his portrayal in Band of Brothers? I know I've listened to past podcasts of say like other people who like to study the war, and they say it was a very character driven series. A little bit different from the Pacific, which chronicled Eugene Sledge, Robert Leckie, and John Basilone. And I've you see movies, say whether deal with anything, whether or based on true people and true events, where the families are not happy about how their loved one was portrayed. What did Sergeant Malarkey? What did he think of the miniseries?
His family thought that Scott Grimes nailed it in terms of playing Don Malarkey. They really thought that he brought out the humor that Don had as a young man. Don himself was generally pleased with Band of Brothers, although he thought that there were some scenes that were went a little bit too far, and there was a little bit too much fiction in it for Don.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always going to be kind of, I guess, difficult to celebrate, separate, especially, separate fact from Hollywood.
Right. But they did, but I think what they all appreciated is I think they captured, the HBO series captured the grittiness, the horror, the pain, the camaraderie, of war very well, and the fear, the haunting scenes in Bastogne. I mean, I can watch that over and over, and it's just, I can almost feel the cold when I watch that. So I think generally they thought that it was well done.
Yeah, talking about how cold it must have been over there, and there's a channel on YouTube where it has Band of Brothers funny moments, and it just shows Malarkey sitting around with Skip Muck and a few other guys. I think they were talking about how, I guess maybe one soldier got shot in the backside.
Right.
And it was just
Buck Compton, I think.
Yeah, Buck Compton, and and they all, it was just something that, kind of a light moment. You think they're just sitting there in just bone chilling, just absolutely brutal conditions. I think that was, even to this day, is still the coldest winter on record in Europe. And I think even Fahrenheit in degrees, it was below zero, and the wind was blowing. I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
As someone who's grown up here in the American Southeast, whereas obviously we have brutal summers down here. Just to be able to you hear about their weapons would freeze,
right.
And they lacked so much, or they lacked winter clothing. I mean, obviously they had their jackets, but that was just nowhere near enough.
Yeah, his gloves. He talked about how his gloves would freeze to his Tommy gun. It was that bad, and he wore burlap bags around his boots, and we lost a lot of men to trench foot in those years and in that place.
I know that when veterans will come back from war, a lot of times they will just completely disassociate from the men they served with. As even in the series, Joe Liebgott chose not to associate after the war. Floyd Talbert didn't either. Did Sergeant Malarkey? Did he go to as many reunions as possible? If he was able to travel, because I know a lot of them, even getting into the 1990s, they probably had to be up in their 80s.
Yeah. The weird thing about Malarkey was that for a guy who jumped into the night sky on D-Day, he hated to fly. He was afraid of heights. So he didn't do a lot of flying. And I think he was afraid to revisit the past. So he went, they started having reunions right after World War II, but Don did not start going until the mid-'80s, I believe. He went to one, I believe, in New Orleans. And he found it therapeutic, but it was also scary in that it was overwhelming to him after having gone 3 decades without facing the war, and suddenly all of the stories were just right in his face, and all of these men's faces that he'd remembered, they were right there, and it overwhelmed him. He gets up And he tells his wife and the guests that he's going to walk back to his hotel. He winds up getting lost. They can't find him. Ooh. So it's a very scary experience as well as therapeutic. But after he gets back, he writes to Winters and he said, he kind of apologized for scaring everybody because he got lost on his way back to the hotel. But he said it was just overwhelming. I couldn't take it. And he basically said there hasn't been a day since the war that I haven't thought about you and how many times you saved my life, basically. Mm-hmm. And so, but he did have the courage to start going to the reunions after that and went to most of them. And then his daughter, Mary Ann McNally, she became sort of one of the leaders who kept it going. There came a point when the men were in their 80s that they could no longer organize these things because of their health. So the next generation, like my generation, I'm 68, they took over and started doing that. And Mary Ann was among those who did that. So,
would he talk to other Easy Company men, say just over the phone? Was that something that
a little bit? He calls in Easy Company Soldier. He recalls a time when he called Joe Toy. So he kept in touch with Toy, and he was very close friends with Buck Compton. Mm-hmm. And so those were two that he kept in touch with. And so he was neither the life of the party guy that always had to be in touch, nor was he a recluse, as some were. He was somewhere in the middle. But we use a metaphor in Easy Company Soldier about facing your past, and we use the metaphor. There's birds, they're called puffins here on the Oregon coast, and they either they can't when a wave's coming, they're too small and slow to outrace the wave to shore, and they're too small to go up and over the wave. They'll just get hammered. So they learned that the safest thing to do is turn and dive right into the wave. And I think that's what Don ultimately wound up doing. First, I think with daring to write his memoir, because like you said at the start, Dave, that when you're asked questions repeatedly about the past, it's very painful. But he faced that, and then I think earlier the band of brothers helped him face it, and then ultimately, though, I think that his relationship with Fritz Engelbert was the ultimate sort of turning and diving into the waves. To experience it with an enemy soldier, to talk about what it was like to be in Bastogne in the winter of 44-45. This was the ultimate in forgiveness, the ultimate in facing the past, the ultimate in getting past beyond the past. And so, in 2017, Don Fritz has already died. Don is still alive, but he doesn't have much time left. And so the reunion that year, the Easy Company reunion, is going to be in Portland, just an hour north of where Don lives in Salem. And so his daughter, Mary Ann, who's organizing the event, she invites both sons of Fritz Engelbert, Volker and Matthias, to come to Oregon and be part of the reunion, not asking permission from the sons and daughters and nephews and nieces of all these Easy Company guys, some of whom's fathers were deceased and had been killed obviously by German soldiers. And so she's basically inviting these sons of a German soldier, and it went amazingly well. The men were nervous, but they were warmly welcomed. And Don got to be there. It was his last reunion. He would die just a few months after it. But that was kind of the happy ending to all this, that not only did Fritz and Fritz's two sons and Don's daughter become close friends, but these two sons of Fritz Engelbert were kind of welcomed into the Easy Company family, as it were. I was in L.A. last fall for a reunion, to speak at a reunion there, Easy Company reunion. And these people still get together and they still remember. And I just thought that was very broad-minded of them to accept these two men and to honor them, knowing that, like them, their fathers were just thrown into battle with little choice on their end. So.
Speaking with Mr. Bob Welch, he is the author of the book Saving My Enemy, How Two World War II Soldiers Fought Against Each Other and Later Forged a Friendship. that saved their lives. How did Fritz and Don ever? How did they ever come into contact with one another?
That's a great question, Dave. They're in. I'm thinking it was 2004 in Iraq. There was a U.S. sergeant named Bill Mahoney, and Mahoney, his unit was really in need of some sort of infusion of hope and encouragement. So he, through some people he knew, he somehow got in contact with Earl McClung, who was one of the Band of Brothers. He said, Earl, on the 4th of July, could you get a few of the Band of Brothers guys, the Easy Company guys? Could we do a satellite phone conversation with you from the United States when we're here in Iraq to encourage my men and women? And they worked that out. But in the middle of that, on July 4th, 2004, the unit was shelled, and one person died. And McClung, back in Denver, Colorado, he hears this all over his phone while he's being interviewed.
Wow.
And and after it's over, he goes, oh my gosh, these guys, this is what they're going through. They're going through what we went through. He said, they need so much more than a phone call. So he said to Billy, he said, how about if we have some of our guys come to Germany, where your home base is, and actually meet with them face to face? And Mahoney was all over that, you bet. And so they worked it out. That was July. They worked it out that on the 60-year anniversary of the start of the Battle of the Bulge in 2004, that half a dozen of them would come, including Malarkey. So, and then the last words that Mahoney says to McClung, he goes, hey, and what if we invite some German soldiers? And there's a big long pause on the other end of the phone.
I can imagine there would be.
Exactly. You don't fight a war like that and then suddenly just turn around and welcome your enemy to come share a beer with you. But anyway, Maloney had the farsightedness to think that there was some healing in enemies coming together and actually seeing each other. So he knew some people who knew some people, and they invited a bunch of German soldiers. Guess how many showed up that night at the tavern? One. And that was Fritz Engelbert. And he did not want to be there. But his sons had seen how difficult he was having healing, and they thought this would be good for him to be able to face his enemies. He goes, well, why would I want to be humiliated in front of these now Hollywood stars? You know, they not only won the war, but now they're Hollywood movie stars. I'm a nobody. You know, I'm a pawn of Adolf Hitler. Why would I want to be humiliated? But his sons talk him into going. He has the courage to go. And as soon as the event begins, his worst fears occur when Bill Garnier, Wild Bill Garnier, Wild Bill, who learned that his brother had been killed, I think, in Italy the night before Bill was to jump at D-Day. And then he said, I'm going to kill every German that I see. You know, this tough Philly kid. He hated Germans with a passion, in part because they'd killed his brother, and he wanted to avenge his brother's death. Even after the war, he had a hard time. And so he was one of the 6 men who really wasn't too thrilled about the idea that the Germans could be showing up at this gathering of, you know, a couple of dozen current day U.S. soldiers, 6 Easy Company guys, and then some German soldiers from World War II. He didn't like the idea. So he meets Fritz, and the first thing he says is, Fritzy, it's a good thing I didn't meet you back in 1944. Otherwise, I would have killed you. And he just, you know,
made the motion.
The motion. And that is exactly what Fritz Engelbert did not need. That's what he feared the most. That not only would he not be accepted, but he would be hated. And so he gets up to leave, but his son puts his hand on his father's leg and says, wait, father, this is not the time to do this. And then Don, meanwhile, stands up, hoists his beer in the air and says, to the newest member of the Band of Brothers, Fritz Engelbert. And he hoists a beer in Engelbert's honor. And Don endorsing him, Don welcoming him into the fold, gives Fritz an in with the other 5. Even Wild Bill comes around later the next day when they're viewing the cemetery in Luxembourg, and basically, as much as he could, basically apologize, and gives him a beer coaster with his signature on it. Easy Company soldiers, and Fritz accepts it with pride, and he's been welcomed into the fold. He has felt lonely for 60 years, and suddenly, not only is he being honored by people, he's being honored by the people that tried to kill him, and this is extremely meaningful to him. That afternoon at the cemetery, there are school children in Bastogne who have made drawings for these men and said, basically in honoring peace and what they went through in the war, but honoring peace. And he feels a tremendous sense of acceptance, and from nobody more so than, of course, Don Malarkey. That night they sit down over beers and really galvanize this relationship they have. And so that's how it all came about. So I would argue that it was pride, or it was courage on three people's parts. Bill Maloney to have the courage to invite Germans, Fritz Engelbert to have the courage to be the only one who showed up, and Don Malarkey to have the courage, even though he could have gone along and laughed at Fritz and sort of joined in the putting him down that Garnier was doing. He did the opposite. He hoisted a beer in his honor against the sort of climate that was going on in that little room at that time. So courage on three people's parts made the big difference in saving my enemy.
Hey, you love to hear stories like that, of where, veterans, from either side, can find it in themselves to forgive. One story I've always, found fascinating is where, I'm sure you probably heard of this as well, an American bomber.
I know what you're going to say.
The bomber pilot.
The air, a higher, what is it? A higher power?
I believe so. Yes. Where,
something like, he guides it. The German guides the American guy down. Yeah,
exactly.
I read that book. Yeah.
Yeah, I have it. I've got so much here, so many books in my World War II library that I've kind of started reading, stopped reading, but yeah, it's obviously a young American pilot. I believe he's coming back from a bombing raid.
Right.
The Luftwaffe have shot down numerous planes. His is crippled. I believe half or more of the crew is dead. And the German pilot just sees so much fear in his face that he easily could have zeroed in on him and just knocked him out. And, obviously shot the plane down, but did not.
Yeah.
And, as they were...
guides him to safety.
Exactly. Yeah, guides him out of German airspace and then salutes him.
Right.
And I kind of wonder. I'm like, what would the German, his superiors, what would they have thought if they had seen that? As letting the enemy go. But I mean, that's obviously a question can only be answered in time. Did Sergeant Malarkey, did he find it tough to go back to Europe? Obviously, so many years after the war.
Actually, Dave, no, just the opposite. He led many tours because once Band of Brothers came out as a HBO series, he immediately had invitation after invitation to lead this tour and do this, and he took it as a point of pride. He liked it. Wonderful. He didn't mind going back to Bastogne and seeing the foxholes and Jack's Woods. He developed so many good friendships this way, and that were very meaningful to him. So for him, he was not that soldier who couldn't go back and face it. I mean, those in the early years, in the first 3 decades after the war, that was the case. But once he got back in, going to reunions, and then Stephen Ambrose interviews him for the book, which came out in '91, and then 10 years later, the movie's out. He kind of gradually got deeper and deeper into facing the war. Meanwhile, in Germany, Fritz Engelbert, his sons just wanted their father more than anything to do that. And so they get him a computer, I believe in early 2000s. And the first thing that his father types into the search engine on the internet is Battle of the Bulge. So once he has the tools, he suddenly realizes, what, you mean I can talk to other people who have experienced something that I have? Yeah, Dad, you can go on here and you can talk to people who were in the battle. And so he gets very interested in his part of the war, and actually winds up going to Belgium. He gets invited by a family to come to Belgium. A documentary maker wants to interview him, and he's hesitant at first, but then he's accepted in Belgium, even though these are the people who got caught in the crossfire during the Battle of the Bulge between American troops and German troops, and yet they accepted him unconditionally. And that just absolutely, for a man who had felt 60 years of non-acceptance, that felt really good. And that was kind of a prequel to his meeting Dawn, and a deepening of his sense of acceptance and affirmation.
Did Sergeant Malarkey, was it, I guess I don't say was it a problem after Band of Brothers came out that, you know, he would be so recognized, I guess, in the community? That's
a great question, Dave. He wouldn't have said that it was a problem, but his daughter would. And she said, my dad kind of got a swelled head. He got, you know, like, be out for dinner, and, you know, he could never buy his own dinner. And because people would say, well, that's Don Malarkey, or, you know, some kid at Walmart would, you know, whoa, you're Don Malarkey. And so he got a little bit of a swelled head. You know, that was sort of a false sense of protection, because, like I said, that makes you feel good sort of on the outside, but again, it doesn't do anything to quell the demons in your soul. And I think that's where Fritz came into the equation.
Because I know that Major Winters, I know he never sought the spotlight. You know, he was a very private man.
Yes.
You know, when he came back from the war, and of course, obviously, you know, he was interviewed for Band of Brothers. And,
yes.
You know, I just, you know, I kind of, that's actually a question that came to me before we started the interview was, you know, was suddenly, you know, Sergeant Malarkey's mailbox just overflowing with, you know, fan mail, or, you know, people wanting autographs, or, requesting interviews. Maybe they were writing books and they would want him to write the foreword.
He was getting an awful lot of that after the book came out in 91, and particularly after the HBO series came out in 01. A lot of that. Every day he would get requests for, and that's for autographs and memorabilia. And that's where Marianne came alongside him, and she started being sort of his manager, as it were. I mean, he literally, he was happy to do this stuff, but he needed some guidance. And so she kind of arranged a lot of his flights and his speaking engagements and stuff like that. But he enjoyed it. It was he took pride in realizing that people were interested in his story. And so he was glad to go speak to a grade school class in Salem, or fly to Europe and lead, you know, 50 people on a tour through the foxholes in Bastonia.
Wow. Well, Mr. Welch, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. One final question before I let you go. Any more World War II books in the works?
You know, I have nothing going right now. Nothing war related at all. I'm helping some other people write some stories, but I very, very much enjoyed Saving My Enemy and the response we've gotten. And you know, hopefully down the road that will be a movie. Nothing in the works yet, but we have some people kicking the tires, and we'll see what happens. So thanks, Dave. I've enjoyed it.
Almost definitely, Mr. Welch. Again, the book is Saving My Enemy, how two World War II soldiers fought against each other and later forged a friendship that saved their lives. Mr. Welch, how about if you like, give some information on how people can find your books, or even maybe even some contact info?
Yeah, Saving My Enemy is available just about everywhere books are sold, and Amazon.com, obviously. My website is Bob Welch Writer, BobWelchWriter, BobWelchWriter.com. My email is bobwelch or bobwelch@bobwelchwriter.com. So look forward to talking to anybody and answering any more questions. So thanks a lot, Dave.
Yes, sir, Mr. Welch. I'd love to be able to talk to you again sometime.
Okay. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bob.
You bet. Bye-bye.